The sun was setting behind the rolling hills of Texas, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Samuel Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he finished loading the last of the trading goods into his small wooden cabin. At 34 years old, he had been living alone on this piece of frontier land for nearly 3 years now. His trading post wasn't much to look at, just a simple log cabin with a small barn and a well, but it served its purpose. Samuel had come to Texas after losing everything back in Missouri. His wife had died from fever, and their young son had followed her just 2 months later. The pain was too much to bear in the place where every corner held memories of happier times. So he packed what little he had left and headed west, looking for a new start in the untamed frontier. Life out here was hard, but it was honest work. He traded with whoever came by. Settlers heading further west, occasional soldiers, and sometimes even friendly native tribes. Most folks warned him about the Comanche, saying they were fierce warriors who showed no mercy to white men. But Samuel had always believed that people were people, no matter what color their skin was or what language they spoke. As the evening air began to cool, Samuel was about to head inside when he heard something unusual. It was a soft moaning sound, almost like an injured animal. He grabbed his rifle from beside the door, not because he wanted to shoot anything, but because a man living alone on the frontier learned to be careful. Following the sound, he walked about 50 yards from his cabin toward a cluster of mesquite trees. There, lying in the tall grass, was a young girl. But this wasn't just any girl. She was clearly Comanche, with long black hair braided with small beads and wearing a buckskin dress that was now torn and dirty. Samuel's first instinct was to step back. The stories he'd heard about Comanche warriors flashed through his mind. But then he looked closer at the girl and his heart sank. She couldn't have been more than 16 years old, and she was badly hurt. Her face was bruised, her lip was split, and there were rope burns around her wrists. Someone had treated this young woman very badly. He set his rifle against a tree and knelt down beside her. Her eyes fluttered open, and when she saw him, fear filled her dark eyes. She tried to scramble backward, but her injuries made it impossible. "Easy, there," Samuel said softly, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt you." The girl didn't understand his words, but something in his gentle tone must have calmed her a little. She stopped trying to move away but kept watching him carefully, like a wounded deer ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. Samuel could see she was in bad shape. Besides the obvious injuries to her face, there was dried blood on her arms and legs. Her buckskin dress was torn in several places, and she was shivering despite the warm evening air. "You're hurt pretty bad," he said, even though he knew she couldn't understand him. Sometimes talking helped even when the other person didn't know what you were saying. "Let me help you." He stood up slowly and gestured toward his cabin. The girl's eyes followed his movement, and he could see her trying to decide whether to trust him or not. Samuel understood her fear. If the situations were reversed, he wouldn't know what to think either. To show her he meant no harm, Samuel walked a few steps toward his cabin, then turned back and gestured for her to follow. When she didn't move, he tried a different approach. He remembered seeing Comanche traders use hand signs before, so he pointed to her, then to himself, then made a gesture toward his cabin while trying to look as friendly as possible. After what felt like forever, the girl slowly, painfully got to her feet. She swayed a little, and Samuel instinctively stepped forward to help steady her. She flinched at first, but when he just supported her elbow gently and didn't try to grab her, she allowed his help. The walk back to the cabin was slow. The girl was clearly in pain with every step, and Samuel had to stop several times to let her rest. Each time he made sure to stay where she could see him and keep his movements slow and predictable. Once they reached the cabin, Samuel faced another challenge. How do you invite someone inside when they don't speak your language? He opened the door and gestured inside, then stepped back to give her space. The girl looked at the open doorway for a long moment, then at Samuel, then back at the door. Finally, she took a tentative step inside. Samuel followed but stayed near the door so she wouldn't feel trapped. His cabin was simple but clean, just one room with a fireplace, a wooden table, 2 chairs, and a bed in the corner. There were shelves lined with trading goods and supplies, and everything was neat and organized. The girl stood in the middle of the room, looking around carefully. Samuel could tell she was taking note of everything: where the weapons were kept, how many exits there were, anything that might be important if she needed to defend herself or escape quickly. "You must be hungry," Samuel said, moving slowly toward his small food storage area. He pulled out some jerky, hardtack, and a jar of preserves his neighbor had given him months ago. The girl watched every move he made. Samuel set the food on the table and gestured for her to sit in one of the chairs. She hesitated, then sat down but stayed ready to jump up if needed. He poured water from his pitcher into a clean cup and set it in front of her, then sat down across the table. The girl looked at the food and water but didn't touch anything. Samuel realized she might be afraid it was poisoned or drugged. To show her it was safe, he tore off a piece of jerky and ate it himself, then took a sip from the water cup. Only then did the girl cautiously reach for the food. She ate slowly at first, then more eagerly as her hunger took over. Samuel could tell she hadn't eaten in quite a while. While she ate, he got up and gathered some clean cloth and a bowl of water. When she looked at him questioningly, he pointed to her injuries and made washing motions. The girl studied him for a long moment, then nodded slightly. Samuel was very careful to clean only the cuts on her arms and hands where she could see what he was doing. He worked gently, and whenever she winced, he would stop and wait for her to nod before continuing. As he cleaned her wounds, Samuel found himself wondering what had happened to her. The rope burns on her wrists told a story he didn't like to think about. Someone had tied her up, probably kidnapped her from her people. The other injuries suggested she had been treated roughly, maybe beaten. It made his blood boil to think of anyone hurting a young girl like this. When he finished cleaning her wounds, Samuel showed her the bed in the corner of the room. He pointed to it, then to her, trying to communicate that she should sleep there. Then he pointed to himself and gestured toward the floor near the fireplace, showing her that he would sleep there instead. The girl looked surprised by this gesture. In her weakened state, she had probably expected the worst from him. But Samuel just wanted her to feel safe and get the rest she needed to heal. He built up the fire to make sure the cabin would stay warm through the night, then laid out his bedroll on the floor. The girl watched all of this with growing amazement. Here was a white man, supposed to be her enemy, treating her with more kindness than she had seen in days. As she settled onto the bed, still wearing her torn dress because Samuel had no other clothes that would fit her, she spoke for the first time. It was just one word in Comanche, but Samuel could tell from her tone that she was saying thank you. "You're welcome," he replied softly, even though he knew she wouldn't understand the words. Then he lay down on his bedroll and closed his eyes, though he stayed alert in case she needed anything during the night. As the fire crackled softly and the girl's breathing became slow and steady with sleep, Samuel stared at the ceiling and wondered what tomorrow would bring. He had just made a decision that could change everything, maybe even cost him his life. But looking at that injured girl, he knew he couldn't have done anything different. Sometimes doing the right thing was more important than doing the safe thing. Samuel woke before dawn, as was his habit. The fire had burned down to glowing embers and the cabin was filled with the soft gray light of early morning. He glanced toward the bed and saw that the Comanche girl was still sleeping, though not peacefully. She was tossing and turning, making small sounds that told him she was having bad dreams. He quietly added wood to the fire and started preparing breakfast. The smell of coffee brewing and bacon sizzling in the pan seemed to wake her. Samuel turned to see her sitting up in bed, looking around with confusion before remembering where she was. Her hand instinctively went to her side, where Samuel noticed she kept a small knife hidden in her dress. "Good morning," Samuel said gently, holding up his hands to show he was only holding cooking utensils. The girl watched him carefully as he continued preparing food. He made sure to move slowly and keep talking in a calm voice, even though she couldn't understand his words. "I hope you slept better than it looked," he said, flipping the bacon. "Those dreams seemed pretty rough. I get them too sometimes, especially after my family died. Takes time for the mind to heal just like the body." The girl slowly got out of bed, wincing as her sore muscles protested. Samuel could see she was feeling better than yesterday, though still hurting. He gestured toward a wash basin he had set up with clean water and a towel, indicating she could wash up if she wanted to. While she freshened up, Samuel finished cooking and set 2 plates on the table. This time, the girl didn't hesitate as much before sitting down to eat. She was still cautious, but hunger won out over fear. Samuel noticed she ate with good manners, despite her circumstances. Her family had clearly raised her well. After breakfast, Samuel began his daily routine of organizing his trading goods and checking his supplies. The girl watched everything he did with keen interest. When he started mending a torn piece of canvas, she made a small sound to get his attention. She pointed to the canvas, then to herself, making sewing motions with her hands. Samuel understood she was offering to help. He handed her the needle and thread, curious to see what she would do. Her stitching was far neater and stronger than his rough work. She had clearly been taught well by the women in her tribe. "That's mighty fine work," Samuel said admiringly. The girl looked up at his tone and smiled slightly, the first real smile he had seen from her. It transformed her whole face, making her look even younger and reminding Samuel of his own daughter at that age. As the morning wore on, they began to communicate more effectively. Samuel would point to objects and say their English names, and the girl would repeat them back in her accented but clear voice. In return, she taught him the Comanche words for the same items. Samuel's pronunciation was terrible, which seemed to amuse her greatly. "Water," Samuel said, holding up a cup. "Pah," she replied, then giggled softly when he tried to repeat it and got it completely wrong. They spent nearly an hour this way, building a basic vocabulary between them. Samuel learned that her name was something that sounded like Ayana, which she indicated meant something beautiful by pointing to a wildflower, and then to herself. He told her his name was Samuel, which she pronounced Samuel, with careful attention to each syllable. Around midday, a traveling merchant came by the trading post. Samuel had done business with Jake Peterson before. He was a decent man who traveled between settlements buying and selling goods. But when Jake saw Ayana sitting at Samuel's table, his whole demeanor changed. "Samuel, what in blazes are you doing with that Comanche girl?" Jake demanded, his hand moving instinctively toward his pistol. "Don't you know they've been raiding settlements up north? Killed a whole family just last week." Samuel stepped between Jake and Ayana, who had tensed up at the stranger's hostile tone. "She's hurt, Jake. I'm just helping her heal up before she goes back to her people." "Are you out of your mind?" Jake's voice rose. "When her people find out she's been here, they'll think you've done God knows what to her. They'll come for your scalp and probably mine too if I'm found here." Samuel could see Ayana watching this exchange with growing understanding. She might not know all the words, but she clearly understood the threat in Jake's voice and posture. Her own hand had moved to where Samuel knew she kept her knife. "Jake, calm down," Samuel said firmly. "Look at her. She's just a kid who's been through something terrible. I'm not going to turn away someone who needs help, regardless of what tribe they're from." "You're making a mistake that's going to get you killed," Jake warned, but he didn't draw his weapon. He had known Samuel long enough to recognize the stubborn set of his jaw. "I won't say anything to anyone about seeing her here, but you better get her back to her people fast." After Jake left, the mood in the cabin had changed. Ayana sat quietly, and Samuel could tell she was thinking hard about something. Finally, she began drawing in the dirt floor with a stick. She drew what looked like a big man with feathers in his hair, then many smaller figures around him. Samuel understood she was showing him her family, her father and many warriors. Then she pointed to herself and made gestures that Samuel interpreted as her being captured. She showed rough treatment, being tied up, and then escape. Samuel's jaw clenched as he realized his suspicions about what had happened to her were correct. But then Ayana did something that surprised him. She pointed to Samuel, then to herself, then made a protective gesture with her arms. She was trying to tell him that by helping her, he might be putting himself in danger from her own people. Samuel knelt down beside her and looked directly into her eyes. "I understand," he said slowly. "But I couldn't leave you out there hurt. I had to help." Something in his tone seemed to reach her, even across the language barrier. She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. In broken English, mixed with Comanche words and gestures, she began to tell him more of her story. Her father, she managed to communicate, was a war chief, a very important leader. She had been out gathering medicinal plants with some other women when white soldiers had attacked them. The other women had been killed, but Ayana had been taken prisoner. She showed him again the rope burns on her wrists and gestured to indicate she had been tied up for days. Samuel felt anger building in his chest as he realized what she had endured, but Ayana wasn't finished. She pointed to herself, then made a gesture of shame, covering her face with her hands. Samuel realized she was worried that her family would think less of her because she had been captured. "No," Samuel said firmly, gently pulling her hands away from her face. "You did nothing wrong. You survived. That takes courage." He spent the rest of the afternoon trying to show her, through words and actions, that she had nothing to be ashamed of. He told her about his own losses, about the pain of losing his family, and how sometimes surviving when others don't can make a person feel guilty even though they shouldn't. As evening approached, Samuel prepared another meal. This time, Ayana helped him cook, showing him how to prepare some wild plants she had identified growing near his cabin. The food was better than anything Samuel had made in months. After dinner, they sat by the fire. Ayana had found some beads in Samuel's trading goods and was repairing a torn section of her dress. Samuel worked on cleaning his rifle, a daily ritual that kept his weapon in good condition. "Samuel," Ayana said suddenly. When he looked up, she pointed to herself, then to the horizon where the sun had set. She was telling him she would leave soon, probably tomorrow. Samuel nodded, understanding. As much as he had enjoyed her company and wanted to make sure she was fully healed, he knew she needed to return to her people, and the longer she stayed, the more danger it might bring to both of them. But tonight, for just a little while longer, they sat together in comfortable silence. Two people from different worlds who had found a moment of peace and understanding in each other's company. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they were simply two human beings sharing warmth and safety beside a crackling fire. The morning sun streamed through the small window of Samuel's cabin, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Ayana was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed with her back straight and her hands folded carefully in her lap. Samuel could tell from her posture that she had made up her mind about something important. "Today," she said in her careful English, pointing toward the horizon where her people lived. It was one of the first complete thoughts she had managed to express, in his language, and the weight of it settled heavy in the room. Samuel nodded slowly, though his heart felt heavier than he expected. Over the past 2 days, he had grown used to having company again. The cabin felt less lonely with someone else moving around in it, someone to share meals with and teach new words to. But he had always known this moment would come. "You sure? You're ready?" he asked, looking at her face where the bruises were still fading from purple to yellow. "You could stay another day or two. Let those cuts heal up better." Ayana shook her head firmly. "My father, he worry. He think..." She struggled with the English words, then switched to a mix of Comanche and gestures. Samuel understood she was saying that the longer she was gone, the more her family would fear the worst had happened to her. Samuel spent the morning gathering supplies for her journey. He packed dried meat, hardtack biscuits, and a small pouch of coffee beans in a leather satchel. He included a water skin that he filled from his well, making sure it was completely full. The journey back to her people would take her at least 2 days on foot, maybe longer if she had to be careful about avoiding settlements. While he prepared her supplies, Ayana worked on something of her own. She had found some colored thread in his trading goods and was carefully embroidering a small piece of leather. Her fingers moved quickly and skillfully, creating a pattern that looked like a bird in flight. Samuel watched her work, amazed at how beautiful she could make something with just simple thread and leather. "For you," she said when she finished, holding up the small leather piece. "To remember Ayana." Samuel took the gift carefully, running, his thumb over the smooth stitching. "It's beautiful. I'll treasure it always." He tied it to his belt where it would stay close to him. As the sun climbed higher, Samuel knew he needed to have a serious conversation with her. He had been thinking about what Jake Peterson had said, and what it might mean when Ayanna returned to her people. "Ayanna," he said, sitting down across from her at the table, "I need you to understand something important." He spoke slowly, using simple words and gestures to help her follow along. "When you go back to your family, they might ask questions about what happened here." She nodded, her dark eyes serious as she listened. "Your father is a war chief, right? A leader of warriors?" Samuel continued. When she nodded again, he took a deep breath. "He might not understand why I helped you. He might think I had bad reasons." Ayanna's expression changed as she began to grasp what he was trying to tell her. She had been thinking about this too, Samuel realized. It was part of why she looked so troubled this morning. "My father," she said slowly, "he is strong man, proud man. He protect his family." She made a gesture that Samuel interpreted as fierce or dangerous. "He maybe think you hurt Ayanna." "That's what I'm worried about," Samuel admitted. "I want you to tell him the truth, that I found you hurt, helped you get better, and sent you home safely. Nothing more happened here." Ayanna stood up and walked to the window, looking out toward the direction of her homeland. When she turned back to Samuel, her young face was filled with worry. "My father has many warriors," she said quietly. 70, maybe 80. All brave fighters. If he think you do bad things." She didn't finish the sentence, but Samuel understood. If her father believed Samuel had harmed his daughter in any way, he would come with an army of warriors seeking revenge. Samuel felt a chill run down his spine, but he tried not to let it show. "Well then, you'll just have to make sure he knows the truth." They spent the next hour with Ayanna practicing what she would tell her father in English, so Samuel could make sure she had the story right. She would explain how Samuel found her, injured, how he gave her his own bed while he slept on the floor, how he fed her and tended her wounds without ever laying a harmful hand on her. "He good man," she practiced saying. "He help Ayanna like brother help sister." Samuel smiled at that comparison. "That's exactly right. Like family helping family." As midday approached, Samuel packed the rest of her supplies. He included a small hunting knife, nothing fancy but sharp and reliable. He also gave her a small blanket that would help keep her warm during the cold desert nights. "You don't have to give me so much," Ayanna protested, but Samuel waved away her concerns. "A person should never start a journey without proper supplies," he said. "Besides, I've got more than I need for just one man." When everything was ready, they stood together outside the cabin. Samuel looked at this young woman who had brought unexpected light into his lonely life, even for just a few days. She looked stronger now, more like the proud daughter of a chief and less like the frightened, injured girl he had found. "Ayanna," Samuel said, "I want you to remember something. What happened to you, being captured, being hurt, that wasn't your fault. You survived something terrible, and that makes you strong, not weak. Don't let anyone, not even your own people, make you feel ashamed." Tears gathered in her eyes, and she nodded solemnly. "I remember, Samuel. I remember everything you teach me." She shouldered the pack he had prepared and started walking toward the horizon. After about 20 steps, she turned back. "Samuel," she called. "You good man. Ayanna never forget." Samuel raised his hand in farewell. "Safe travels, little sister. May your path be smooth and your water never run dry." He watched until she disappeared over a low hill, her figure growing smaller and smaller until she was just a speck against the vast Texas landscape. Then he turned and walked back into his cabin, which suddenly felt much too quiet and much too empty. That evening, Samuel sat alone by his fire, turning Ayanna's gift over in his hands. He thought about the strange few days he had just experienced, how a simple act of kindness had led to an unexpected friendship across cultural lines that were supposed to be impossible to cross. He also thought about what might be coming. If Ayana's father decided that Samuel had done something wrong, there would be consequences. Samuel had heard enough stories about Comanche justice to know that it was swift and final. But even knowing the risk, he couldn't bring himself to regret helping her. As he prepared for bed, Samuel found himself hoping that Chief Running Bear was a reasonable man who would listen to his daughter's words. Because if he wasn't, Samuel might not live to see many more sunsets. But that was tomorrow's worry. Tonight he was content knowing he had done the right thing, regardless of what it might cost him. The fire crackled softly as Samuel settled, down to sleep, unaware that his decision to help one injured girl was about to change his life in ways he could never have imagined. Samuel woke to an eerie silence that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Something was wrong. In his 3 years living on the frontier, he had learned to trust his instincts, and right now, every instinct was screaming danger. The morning birds weren't singing. His chickens weren't making their usual noise. Even the wind seemed to have stopped blowing. Samuel lay perfectly still in his bedroll, listening hard. That's when he heard it. The soft snorting of horses and the creak of leather saddles just outside his cabin. Moving as quietly as possible, Samuel reached for his rifle and crawled to the small window. What he saw made his blood run cold. His cabin was completely surrounded by Comanche warriors on horseback, at least 70 of them, maybe more. They sat motionless as statues, their war paint gleaming in the early morning light. At the front of this army of warriors sat a man who could only be Chief Running Bear. He was bigger than the others, with broad shoulders and scars marking his weathered face. Eagle feathers hung from his long black hair, and his horse was decorated with symbols that spoke of many battles won. His dark eyes were fixed on Samuel's cabin, with an intensity that could burn holes through wood. Samuel's heart hammered in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. Panic would get him killed faster than anything else. He had known this moment might come when he decided to help Ayana. Now he had to face the consequences like a man. Taking a deep breath, Samuel set his rifle aside. Walking out there armed would be suicide and would only prove to the chief that he had something to feel guilty about. Instead, he straightened his shoulders, opened the cabin door, and stepped outside with his hands clearly visible and empty. Sight that greeted him was even more impressive and terrifying up close. 70 mounted warriors in full war gear formed a perfect circle around his property. Some carried lances decorated with feathers and scalps. Others held bows with arrows already nocked. A few had rifles they had probably taken from defeated enemies. Every single one of them was watching Samuel with the cold stare of men ready to kill. But it was Chief Running Bear who commanded Samuel's attention. The war chief sat tall on his spotted war horse, studying Samuel with eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. This was a man who had led warriors into countless battles, who had made life and death decisions for his people, who had earned his position through strength and wisdom. Samuel walked slowly toward the chief, stopping about 10 feet away from his horse. He kept his hands visible and his movements deliberate. One wrong move, one gesture that could be interpreted as threatening, and 70 warriors would turn him into a pincushion before he could blink. "Chief Running Bear," Samuel said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through his veins. "I've been expecting you." The chief's eyes narrowed slightly at Samuel's calm response. He had probably expected to find a cowering white man, not someone who would face him with dignity. After a long moment of tense silence, Running Bear spoke. In heavily accented but clear English, "You are the white man who had my daughter." It wasn't a question, and the way he said "had" made Samuel's stomach clench. The chief clearly suspected the worst. Samuel looked around at the circle of warriors, all of them tensed and ready to strike at their chief's command. One word from Running Bear and Samuel would be dead before he hit the ground. "I found your daughter injured and helped her heal," Samuel replied carefully. "Then I sent her home to you, safe and unharmed." "So you say." Running Bear's voice was like granite. "But why should I believe the words of a white man? Your people take what they want from mine and lie about it." Samuel understood the chief's anger. He had probably seen too many broken treaties, too many promises made and broken by white men. Trust was not something that came easily to a man who had been betrayed before. "Because your daughter is here to tell you the truth herself," Samuel said. As if summoned by his words, Ayanna appeared from behind the line of warriors. She was dressed in traditional Comanche clothing now, a beautiful buckskin dress decorated with beads and quill work. Her hair braided with silver ornaments. She looked every inch the daughter of a chief, proud and strong. But Samuel could see the worry in her eyes as she rode forward to join her father. She knew better than anyone how dangerous this situation was. One wrong word from her could seal Samuel's fate. Running Bear's expression softened slightly when he saw his daughter, relief flickering across his stern features. Samuel realized that despite the chief's anger, he was also a father who had been terrified for his child's safety. "Ayanna," Running Bear said in Comanche, his voice gentler now. "Tell me what happened with this white man." Samuel stood quietly, as father and daughter spoke in their native language. He couldn't understand most of the words, but he could read the emotions on their faces. Ayanna spoke earnestly, gesturing toward Samuel and then toward the cabin. She was telling her story, explaining how Samuel had found her and what had happened during her stay. Running Bear listened intently, his face giving nothing away. Occasionally he would ask a question, and Ayanna would answer with the same serious. Samuel caught a few English words mixed in with the Comanche, "Good man, help my brother safe." The conversation seemed to go on forever. Samuel was aware of the warriors around him shifting restlessly in their saddles. Some of them looked disappointed that they hadn't been given the order to attack yet. Others seemed curious about what their chief's daughter was saying about this white stranger. Finally, Ayanna finished speaking. Running Bear sat in silence for a long moment, processing everything his daughter had told him. The tension was so thick, Samuel could practically cut it with a knife. Then the chief turned his attention back to Samuel. "My daughter says you found her hurt and bleeding. She says you gave her your bed while you slept on the ground. She says you fed her and tended her wounds without laying a hand on her in anger or lust." "That's the truth," Samuel replied simply. "She also says you gave her supplies for the journey home and sent her away safely when she was ready to leave." "Yes, sir, I did." Running Bear studied Samuel's face for what felt like an eternity. Samuel forced himself to meet the chief's gaze steadily, knowing that any sign of deception or weakness would doom him. "My daughter says you treated her like family," Running Bear said finally. "Like a brother caring for his sister." "She reminded me of my own daughter," Samuel admitted. "I lost my family to sickness a few years back. When I saw Ayanna hurt and scared, I couldn't just leave her there." Something shifted in Running Bear's expression at these words. Perhaps he recognized the grief that still lived in Samuel's eyes, the same grief any father would feel at losing a child. The chief dismounted from his horse and walked toward Samuel. The warriors tensed, hands moving to weapons, but Running Bear held up a hand to stop them. He stopped directly in front of Samuel, close enough that Samuel could see the old battle scars on the man's arms and chest. "You could have taken advantage of my daughter when she was weak and helpless," Running Bear said quietly. "Many men would have, but you chose honor instead." Samuel said nothing, sensing that the chief had more to say. "My daughter also tells me that you warned her I might not understand your kindness, that you knew helping her could bring danger to yourself." Running Bear's voice carried a note of respect that hadn't been there before. "Yet you helped her. Anyway." The two men stood facing each other in the morning sun, surrounded by mounted warriors, while the fate of Samuel's life hung in the balance on the next words Chief Running Bear would speak. The silence stretched between Samuel and Chief Running Bear like a bowstring pulled tight. Samuel could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears, while 70 warriors waited for their leader's decision. The morning sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across the circle of mounted fighters who sat motionless as carved stone. Running Bear's weathered face revealed nothing as he continued to study Samuel. The chief's dark eyes seemed to be weighing Samuel's soul, searching for any hint of deception or weakness. Samuel forced himself to stand straight and meet that piercing gaze, even though every instinct told him to look away from this dangerous man who held his life in his hands. Finally, Chief Running Bear spoke, his voice carrying across the silent morning air so that every warrior could hear his words. "Samuel Morrison," the chief said, using Samuel's full name for the first time. "You are either the bravest fool I have ever met, or a man of true honor." Samuel said nothing, sensing that Running Bear wasn't finished speaking. "When my daughter disappeared, I gathered my warriors and rode hard for 3 days, following her trail. We found the place where she was taken, saw the blood on the ground, the signs of struggle. We found the camp where her captors held her, saw the ropes they used to bind her hands." The chief's voice grew darker as he continued. "We followed their trail to where she escaped, and then we lost it in the rocky ground. For 2 days we searched, fearing we would find her body. Then she came walking into our camp, healthy and strong, carrying supplies and speaking of a white man who showed her kindness." Running Bear paused, his eyes never leaving Samuel's face. "My warriors wanted to come here with fire and death. They said no white man helps a Comanche girl without taking something in return. They said you must have dishonored her and should pay with your life." Samuel felt sweat beading on his forehead, but he didn't move or speak. Around him the circle of warriors shifted restlessly, their hands near their weapons. "But my daughter stood before all the warriors and elders of our band," Running Bear continued. "She looked them in the eye and swore by the spirits of our ancestors that you treated her with respect. She said you gave her your bed while you slept on the floor. She said you fed her from your own food and asked for nothing in return." The chief took a step closer to Samuel, close enough that Samuel could see the old scars that marked the man's face and arms, evidence of many battles fought and survived. "My daughter is no fool, and she is no liar," Running Bear said firmly. "If she says you acted with honor, then I believe her. But I had to come here myself to see what kind of man you truly are." Samuel found his voice at last. "And what do you see, Chief Running Bear?" A small smile touched the corner of the chief's mouth, the first hint of warmth Samuel had seen from him. "I see a man who stands alone against 70 warriors and shows no fear. I see a man who speaks truth even when lies might save his life. I see a man who helped my daughter when he could have ignored her suffering." Running Bear turned to address his warriors, speaking in rapid Comanche. Samuel caught only a few words, but he could see the surprise on many of the warriors' faces. Some looked disappointed, as if they had been hoping for a fight. Others nodded with what looked like approval. When the chief finished speaking to his warriors, he turned back to Samuel. "I have told my men that you are to be honored, not harmed. You have shown that not all white men are enemies of the Comanche people." Samuel felt his knees go weak with relief, but he managed to stay standing. "I'm grateful for your understanding, Chief. I only did what any decent person should do." "No," Running Bear shook his head. "Many men would not have helped. Many would have left my daughter to die, or worse, would have taken advantage of her weakness. You chose a harder path, knowing it might bring danger to yourself." The chief walked back to his horse and reached into a decorated bag hanging from his saddle. When he returned, he was carrying something that made Samuel's eyes widen in amazement. It was a coup stick, a long wooden staff decorated with eagle, feathers, beadwork, and what looked like bear claws. Samuel had heard of these ceremonial weapons but had never seen one up close. Among the Plains tribes, a coup stick was a symbol of great honor, carried only by the bravest warriors. "This belonged to my father and his father before him," Running Bear said, holding the coup stick reverently. "It has been carried in many battles, has counted coup on many enemies. Today, I give it to you." Samuel stared at the ornate weapon, hardly believing what he was hearing. "Chief, I can't accept something so valuable. I'm not a warrior." "You are wrong," Running Bear said firmly. "A warrior is not just someone who fights with weapons. A warrior is someone who does what is right even when it is dangerous, even when it would be easier to walk away. You are a warrior, Samuel Morrison, and you have earned the respect of the Comanche nation." With great ceremony, Running Bear placed the coup stick in Samuel's hands. The wood was smooth from years of handling, and the decorations were incredibly detailed. Samuel could feel the weight of history and honor in the ancient weapon. "From this day forward," Running Bear announced loudly so all his warriors could hear, "Samuel Morrison is under the protection of Chief Running Bear, and the lone wolf band of the Comanche nation. Any man who harms him will answer to me personally. Murmur went through the circle of warriors. This was clearly not what many of them had expected to happen today. Ayanna rode forward from where she had been watching near her father. She looked proud and relieved, and when she caught Samuel's eye, she smiled the same warm smile he remembered from their days together. "Thank you, Samuel," she said in her careful English. "You saved my life, and now my father saved yours." Samuel looked around at the circle of warriors who had come here ready to kill him and were now bound by their chief's word to protect him. It was almost too much to believe. "There is one more thing," Running Bear said. "Your trading post is now under Comanche protection. Our warriors will watch over this place, and any travelers who stop here will know they are safe. You have given my family a great gift by protecting my daughter. This is how we repay that debt." Samuel felt tears prick his eyes. In helping one injured girl, he had somehow gained the friendship and protection of an entire tribe. "I don't know what to say, Chief." "Say that you will remember this day," Running Bear replied. "Say that you will remember that honor and kindness can bridge any divide between peoples." The chief mounted his horse and raised his hand in a signal to his warriors. As one, the 70 riders began to move, forming up into a column for the journey home. As they prepared to leave, Ayanna rode over to Samuel one last time. She reached into a small bag and pulled out something small and shiny, a bracelet made of silver and turquoise beads. "For you," she said, pressing it into his free hand. "To remember Ayanna, and to remember that friendship is stronger than fear." Samuel carefully slipped the bracelet into his pocket. "I'll treasure it always, little sister." With that, the Comanche war party rode away, leaving Samuel standing alone in front of his cabin, holding a coup stick and feeling like his whole world had changed. He watched until the last warrior disappeared over the horizon, then looked down at the ancient weapon in his hands. From this day forward, Samuel Morrison would be known throughout the frontier as the white man who had earned the respect of Chief Running Bear. And every time he looked at Ayanna's bracelet or the coup stick hanging above his fireplace, he would remember that sometimes doing the right thing, even when it's dangerous, can lead to the most unexpected rewards.